doing research on aid and economic development. Thanks, Matt.
Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. I think I've been in contact with most of our overseas visitors, so it's great to have you here. Today I want to present interim findings from a study of regional or pooled service delivery in the Pacific. This is work that I've done jointly with Tess Newton-Kane, with guidance from Stephen Howes, and with the support of the Asia and the Pacific Policy Studies Journal. The pooled provision of services is one of three forms of regionalism identified in the Pacific Plan. The other two are regional coordination, involving trade and possibly labour migration, and regional cooperation, involving harmonisation and coordination of policies. Pooling it's promoted on many grounds, but I think the key one is achieving economies of scale. Now, pooling received considerable support at the time the Pacific Plan was drafted. I completely agree with Wesley's point that support for regionalism has come and gone in the Pacific at various times. So at the time the Pacific Plan was drafted, there was great support for regionalism, and I think that has waned somewhat in recent years. The Pacific Plan proposed pooling in bulk fuel procurement, aviation, shipping for small island states, and vocational education. And it also sought analysis of potential for pooling in 5 other areas. The Asian Development Bank and Commonwealth Secretariat produced a study in 2005 towards a new Pacific regionalism, which provided cost-benefit analysis for various pooling initiatives. Surprisingly, though, since 2005, there's been no study of whether pooling initiatives thought promising then have actually been established, and if so, how they have performed. And that's what we are seeking to address through this ongoing study. Regional pooling is difficult, and this is highlighted by club theory. The voluntary nature of pooling means that each member needs net positive benefits in order to join and to remain in a club. That alone isn't enough, though. Benefits from pooling must also be higher than those associated with national service delivery. These sovereignty benefits, as they're often referred to as, include donor funding for national service delivery and employment that is associated with. And the Mirab model tells us that these benefits can be very significant, particularly for small and micro states. Benefits also need to be high enough to offset other short-term adjustment costs, such as the cost of harmonising policy settings, which is often a precondition for pooled service delivery. And lastly, benefits need to be shared fairly in order that countries don't enter into conflict and withdraw from a pooling initiative. The Pacific Plan promotes pooling where the market and where national and local level governments are not already providing a service adequately. And this is something that Rob Tranter from AusAid presented on Tuesday night, the market and subsidiarity tests. Another question is also relevant, though, and that is, will regional organisations deliver a service effectively? The mixed performance of international organisations around the world suggests that I think this is a question that is worth asking. And Tony Hughes, in his 2005 review of the regional architecture, identified management capture as a problem for Pacific regional organisations. Now, management capture is essentially a form of principal-agent problem, where a principal, being Pacific Island governments, delegate a task to an agent, the regional organisation. But because we don't live in a world of perfect information, that can lead to a situation where the agent may pursue its own objectives at the expense of the principal. Now, there are reasons for thinking that international and regional organisations are especially susceptible to principal-agent problems. The focus on public administration means that it's difficult to measure their performance, at least in comparison with many private sector entities. Regional organisations also have multiple principals, the states that form their membership, and those states have competing priorities. And this weakens their power relative to regional organisations. In this slide, I've tried to capture some of that complexity in terms of the principal-agent problem. So far, I've highlighted the challenges presented by pooling. I now want to spend the rest of the presentation discussing our findings to date. So we've looked at over 20 initiatives in the Pacific as part of this study, 5 of them in some detail. And from that analysis, I want to highlight 5 key points. So since 2005, the number of attempts to pool services has grown. There have been 7 attempts since the year 2005. I think this is actually in some ways a vindication of the Pacific Plan, which was established, we have to remember, in order to facilitate regionalism. It was never established as a development plan, despite being treated as such. It's true, many attempts to pool services haven't been successful, but this in itself isn't a failure. If analysis has been undertaken and a decision made that a pooling initiative isn't feasible, possibly because the costs outweigh the benefits, then that really should be regarded as a success of public policy. I think several initiatives fit this description in the Pacific, not completely, but partially. Bulk procurement of fuel and bulk procurement of pharmaceuticals comes to mind. The second point, a patchwork of pooled service provision has emerged. So clubs that pool services in the Pacific have different membership bases. Almost no pooled services are the same. And I've got some examples there for you. Again, I think this is a real strength of regionalism in the Pacific. A patchwork of pooled service provision can be more cost-effective as Pacific Island governments are able to pick and choose which clubs they are actually a member of. Different clubs can also complement one another, and I think this is shown historically by the relationship between the parties to the Nauru Agreement and the Foreign Fisheries Agency. Sorry, I'm going quickly through these slides as I don't have much time. Pooled service delivery involves a centralisation of resources, which can benefit some countries disproportionately, and I think this is inevitable. Efforts to distribute benefits are evident in the location of organisations, so it would be more efficient to have all regional organisations in one place, Suva. What do we have though? Yes, many are in Suva, but we also have regional organisations based around the Pacific, in Honiara, Apia, Majuro. Tension between commercial and equity objectives is also evident in the operation of regional organisations. So Pacific Forum Line, for example, decided to focus on commercial routes at the expense of unprofitable services to smaller island members. And at USP, which is the great success of regionalism, there's also this ongoing tension between investment in Lauvala campus and investment in other regional campuses and centres. Now, almost all pooled services in the Pacific rely on donor funds, and this is a point of difference with club theory, which was used in that ADB ComSec study, and it's also a difference with pooling in many other regions of the world. The initiatives that we looked at received on average 80% of their funding from donor, but there's enormous variation within that figure. Now, donor funding has both positive and negative benefits. On the positive side, donor funding has made pooled service provision financially viable and sustainable. Donor assistance, however well-intentioned though, also has negative impacts, and I think these are inevitable in many ways. So donor funds act as a price distortion, paying for schemes that aren't necessarily valued by Pacific Island members. Donor funds also inevitably affect the incentives of regional organisations, which pursue and sometimes compete for that donor funding, and are also under less pressure from member countries to perform, both because they don't need funding from member countries, but also because member countries are less likely to exert pressure on them, given that the regional organisations, I guess, are seen as a free resource. And this last argument has parallels with the governance literature, which highlights the importance of taxation for ensuring that citizens keep governments accountable. The other distinct feature of initiatives that we've looked at is that many are actually about pooling of capacity building efforts rather than service delivery. Where pooled services are delivered, this happens alongside and is often marginal to capacity building efforts. This is partly because they're donor funded, but I think it also reflects the priorities of Pacific Island governments, and that is a good thing. At the same time, a focus on building national capacity to some extent contradicts the purpose of pooling, which is to deliver services at the regional level. And I think there are a number of explanations for both the emphasis on capacity building and reluctance among Pacific Island governments to fund pooled services. These include political economy issues. Individual ministries can be reluctant to cede power and budget resources. There are legitimate concerns about sovereignty, given the recent colonial history of many countries in the region. There are sovereignty benefits associated with national service provision. These are especially important among smaller states. And lastly, I think there's considerable uncertainty about the benefits of regional service delivery. Concluding paragraph, these factors on balance make me pessimistic on the whole about the prospects for expanding pooled service provision, at least along the lines envisaged in the Pacific Plan. I think that cooperation will continue to be the dominant form of Pacific regionalism. That said, pooling does and it will continue to occur. There have been some success stories, both where Pacific Island governments have used services provided by a metropolitan power, say central banking, but also at the sub-regional level. And I think this sub-regional focus is a very good thing. I think it reflects the diverse nature of countries in the region in terms of their size, levels of development, cultural background, the list goes on. And these differences, I think, make very challenging the delivery of services at that Pacific-wide regional level.